In the previous video, we briefly discussed 4 steps of risk analysis and management: identifying risks, risk assessment and analysis, treatments to reduce risks, and determining which treatments to implement. We'll now look at each of these 4 in more detail, starting with identifying risks as well as their sources or causes. A risk, or risk event, or event for short, is something that might happen, and if it happens, would result in a loss to one or more objectives. In some or many cases, we can, but is not necessary, identify sources or causes of events. These sources or causes might also be referred to as hazards or threats. There are numerous ways to identify risks, some of which are detailed here and are useful as inputs to Riskion. Riskion also includes effective collaborative brainstorming and organizing techniques that we will look at later. When identifying risk events, or events for short, it can be helpful to consider the relationships between events and other entities, such as assets, objectives, hazards, and strategic plans. For example, looking at an organization's assets, one might ask what events might take place that would result in one or more losses. Or, looking at the objectives from an organization's strategic plan, one might ask what events might take place to prevent the realization of one or more of the objectives. Or, looking at the hazards or threats, one might ask what events might these hazards or threats cause. With Riskion, events can be added directly along with attributes that can be useful in analyzing results. Alternatively, they can be identified and added using collaborative visual brainstorming. With the Events radio button selected, a whiteboard appears on the right where any participant can click on any empty space and enter an idea for a risk event. Discussion usually ensues, and those ideas that are deemed to be reasonable events to consider drag to the left-hand pane. With the Sources radio button selected, a whiteboard appears on the right where any participant can click on any empty space and enter idea for a risk source, cause, hazard, or event. Discussion usually ensues, and those ideas that are deemed to be reasonable sources to consider drag to the left-hand pane where they can be organized into a hierarchy. The relationship between sources and events are shown when the Events from Sources button is selected. The right-hand pane contains the events, which can be then dragged and dropped on the sources or causes of the event. An event can have more than one source, and a source pertain to more than one event.